Friends, it's a delight to be here today with Professor Ephraim Meir, who is Professor Emeritus of Modern Jewish Philosophy at Bar-Ilan University, Ramat Gan, Israel. From 2009 until 2017, he was the Levinas Guest Professor for Jewish Dialogue Studies and InterReligious Theology at the Academy of World Religions, University of Hamburg. From August until December 2018, he was Research Fellow at the Center of Theological Inquiry in Princeton. He is the president of the International Rosenzweig Society. I could go on and on about his scholarship and his works. I've been a big follower and fan of Professor Meir's, so I'm honored for you to take this time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So to jump right in, how would you distinguish between the enterprise, the project of interreligious theology or dialogue, and how that differs from pluralistic theology or pluralistic dialogue?
Okay, so let me start with some remarks on John Hick's work, who in the 70s and 80s of the preceding century was talking about the pluralistic theology. And he made really a Copernican revolution in this way, that he says that the different religions are perspectives to what he calls the ultimate reality or the real, that means God. So he, so to say, replaced geocentric thought with a heliocentric thought. And Alan Ray's world authority on interreligious dialogue and cooperation has made the distinction between inclusive, exclusive, and pluralist attitudes of religions. Exclusive, that's I have the truth, you don't. Inclusive is the others have partial truth, but I have the whole truth. And pluralistic theology is the recognition of the fact that others have their perspective on the truth. Now, what is the difference between this pluralistic theology and my interreligious theology? I think pluralistic theology is a big step forward, as I said, a Copernican revolution, but interreligious theology goes further in this sense that it supposes an interaction between religions, learning from other religions, extending hospitality to other religions, being a host in the house of religious others. And therefore, there is a kind of communication or interchange between the religions, which is a beautiful opportunity not only to enhance your spirituality, but also to make peace between the religions, which, according to Hans Küng, is a precondition of bringing peace in the world.
Very nice. So what I hear you saying is obviously exclusivist and inclusivist don't go far enough, but even pluralistic, it doesn't go far enough in that it's relatively passive in our understanding of truth as opposed to interactive and engaging. Is that right?
That's right. I love the interaction because that is the lofty opportunity of the human being, that one can translate the own in the words of the other, and that one can understand also the world of the other in his own words, meaning the human beings have the capacity of communication, and we didn't do enough in that sense.
Right. Okay. So what are some of the Jewish philosophical underpinnings of that interreligious theology?
Well, dialogical Jewish philosophers have this emphasis upon the I, which is a relating I, an I in relation, Jewishly speaking, hineni, here I am. Meaning the here I am is the response to the divine, and this is the very backbone of the I. So the I is not an isolated I, but that would be only a mental construct, but I in relationship. So I find, for instance, in Franz Rosenzweig's philosophy, this concept of the I. The I is a responding I, respondio ergo sum. I am answering, therefore I am. Meaning this kind of talk is fitting in a philosophy of the end. Rosenzweig loved the end. God and the world is creation. God and the human being is revelation, and the human being mending the world, that means the human being and the world, is redemption. So the word "and" is important. Also in the reaction to revelation for Franz Rosenzweig, it's not only Judaism that is reacting to the divine revelation, it's also Christianity. As for me, I bring all the religions as reactions, as legitimate reactions to the divine revelation. And also, I learned from Avraham Yoshua Heschel that this is not only a question of intellectual interest in metaphysics, but it is about a deed-centered religiosity which can bring us to improving the world. As we know, he went with Martin Luther King from Selma to Alabama in order to promote the rights of the Black people in the States. So it's very deed-centered also. It's not only intellectual activity, which I see in dialogical philosophy and theology. It's really something which has to do with a task of the human being, which is fitting also to the concept of the emet. Emet is not an abstract concept. The emet is emet mi eretz titzmach. The truth comes from the earth, from beneath. Meaning, we make it, we do it. It's a question of doing. Anshe Emet is trustful people. If we read when we read in the Torah, it says, "Yaminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdo." We trust in God and in Moshe. It's trust. It's a question of existential attitude. So it's not a question of intellectual things, but about doing the truth. And here I'm helped also in the Jewish philosophy with some traditional elements. For instance, Dibra Torah Kilshon Bnei Adam. The Torah is written in the language of the human being. So I have to understand it and to see that all what is written is human reaction to the divine initiative. So in that sense, I see also an intra-religious plurality in Judaism in the saying, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. If we can extend that in an interreligious realm, then we earned a lot, I think, because this plurality is not only true for our intra-religious Jewish world, but important also for the entire world.
Beautiful. It's very inspiring, and I completely agree with what you're saying. And I wonder, for those who may be skeptical, how would you reconcile the need for interreligious dialogue with some of the traditional Jewish commandments in the most extreme form of wiping out Amalek, or the most mild form of not having Gentiles touch Jewish wine? Or someone like Rabbi Soloveitchik, sort of the founder of American modern Orthodoxy, who felt that we shouldn't talk about God or theology with Gentiles. We should just collaborate. You know, how would you respond to that?
Well, I'm not agreeing with Rabbi Soloveitchik in that last point. I think that in my interreligious theology, what is central is transdifference. So the differences are there, but there is a possibility of communicating between the different religions. So there is the particularity which has to be kept and honored, and at the same time there is the possibility, the lofty possibility of communicating between the different religions. So is that in contradiction with some commandments? I would say no, because it has not to be reconciled, because in transdifference you have differences and they have to be kept. But between the differences, we have the dignity of difference with Jonathan Sachs, but between the differences, there is a communication. So the communication is the most important thing. Now, what are you doing with Amalek? So Amalek, if you see in the Jewish tradition, it's interiorized. Also the soldiers of David become the the leaders of the yeshivot, for instance, so also Amalek, it's something within us also. We have to improve and to mend the world in us, in ourselves. So in that sense, Amalek is interiorized. The violence of Amalek, of this command, is mitigated by the rabbis who interiorized this entire Amalek thing. Because in the Midrash, for instance, it's written that Timnah, the mother of Amalek, she wanted to convert, and of the non-acceptance of Timnah as a Jewish is the reason for the raising up of Amalek in rabbinic literature. So you see how this command is interiorized. And then we have, of course, the commands of kashrut, etc. It's a border making, of course. But see also that in the beginning of Christianity, the Jews who became Christians, they kept the commandments. They kept the commandments because they wanted to keep their particularity. And Shaul of Tarsus, Paulus says also very clearly that the Jews have to continue to observe the commandments. Until the 3rd century and the 4th century, Jews who became Christians were keeping their particularity, keeping the mitzvot. The women were going to the mikveh. How do I know that? Because I read Didaskalia in the 3rd century and Chrysostom's Adversus Judaeis in the 4th century. So we see how the church then, in a way, did not respect the particularity of Judaism, all were within her own home. Mm-hmm. But in a way, the term trans-difference avoids many problems. Because on the one hand, you have peculiarities, and on the other hand, a common world. Belonging is not only belonging to a particular world. It's not only belonging to a general world. If you only belong to a general world, you forget your embeddedness in concrete historical context. And if you only have your particularity, you become fanatic because you are not linked to your belonging to the general world. So transdifference, in my view, solves a lot of problems.
Amazing, amazing. So it used to be that 4 years was nothing. For any phenomenon to occur, you needed 400 years. But you wrote your book on InterReligious Theology in 2015, and the world seems to be changing fast. And I wonder, has your opinion regarding this viability of this interreligious dialogue changed in any way based on any global events over the last four years or not?
Well, thank you for this question. I'm very glad for that because, only a few days ago, on the 27th of October, we learned that al-Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, killed himself. And so he was eliminated. And we see here in this case that certainly are eruptions of violence, the violence of ISIS, of Daesh, was already there in 2014, but it became very, very sharp the years after. And so this, of course, influenced my thinking because I'm really promoting dialogue in every sense, but there are limits. And the limits are when somebody doesn't want a dialogue, when he wants to kill you, then you can't have a dialogue. So in a way, I had a very interesting reaction of Peter Berger on my book, InterReligious Theology. And he wrote that it is all right, it was a positive review, but he had a caveat. He said, pay attention, because there are limits to the dialogue out of moral reasons. And he says, let us think about the Aztecs in Mesoamerica in pre-Columbian times. Let us think about that. And he says, Suppose that there are some descendants of this Aztec priests, and they are invited today by the Council of Churches in Geneva, and they are saying, oh, welcome of the Aztec delegation, and we are very glad to welcome you, and we want to hear how it is, how the gods need the human sacrifices. So please, we invite you to talk with us. So it is clear that there are limits in such a dialogue. Right. And also even Martin Buber, who is such a dialogical person, what he said in 1953 is that Hitler was such a person that the evil, that he became so entangled with evil that an unbridgeable rift separates him and the rest of humanity.
Yeah.
So there are impossibilities of having a dialogue. There are limits to the dialogue, and we have to recognize that. Right. It's not an utopian. Dialogue is not an utopian. It's a difficult thing. Yeah. It is a not easy process, right. But I think it's a response to the fanaticism and to fundamentalism and dogmatism and to this kind of standpoints which do not promote a peaceful society.
Beautiful, beautiful, and it's not just pragmatic. It's epistemological, and it's humble because of the epistemic humility that we're always searching beyond. So let me ask you. The two thinkers that influenced my thought the most were 20th century Buber and Levinas, and so I'm overwhelmed with humility to talk to such a scholar of such figures who I've thought about, but you've thought much more about. And so I would love to hear, you're obviously influenced by global events, you're obviously influenced by Jewish thought and by reason and philosophy in general, but how have Buber and Levinas influenced how you think about dialogue?
These are giant thinkers, and you talked about humility, so one has to humbly transmit also what they are thinking in depth. But I was very much inspired by these two giant thinkers. From Martin Buber, I learned mainly that it is important to be present. To be present. He is talking about the Gegenwärtigkeit, to be present. If you are present, then you can make the other person present. And if the other person is present, he can make me or she can make me present. So the presence, the agendaless presence, the being there for the other, is a precondition for every real conversation, for every real meeting. And this I learned from Martin Buber, that the eternal Tao comes into the perspective, so to say, if I'm relating and if I'm present before the other, without a prioris, without observing, without making categories, without a fragmentary approach. In a holistic approach, I'm there for the other, and then the other can be really there for me, which makes the encounter really possible. That's a great thought. It's a simple thought, but very difficult to realize. To be there for the other human being and just to have this deep listening to the other. What does he have to say? How can I be there for the other human being? It's not a cognitive thing. It's an existential thing. One has to be there without any preconceived ideas, which is a simple and very difficult attitude. From Levinas, he was a great philosopher, but also a great Jew. And I love to think about the correspondence between his Jewish thinking, his confessional thinking, his professional philosophical thinking. I have written about that. But from Levinas, I learned that the otherness of the other is not to be so to say, absorbed in the sameness. Meaning that From the other's face comes a command to respect him, to honor him. After the Shoah, he says, "Lo tirzach," thou shalt not murder. So in that sense, you have to give life to the other human being. Now, this otherness is not a cultural otherness. It's not a religious otherness. It's an ethical otherness. The more I honor the other, the more I enter into a spiral of infinity, which can be the equivalent of the divine. Meaning I never reach the divine. I never reach this stage of completely answering the demand of the other. But I'm commanded to honor the other. And this command makes the I an I. The I is in that sense a hineni, and here I am. This is for me a great lesson for interreligious theology. I have to honor and to listen to the other in order not to grasp his otherness. I never grasp it, but to respect him, to see him as a human being who lives his own relationship to the world, to the other human beings, to the divine.
Yeah, fascinating. Given their eras in relationship to the Holocaust, it almost feels like Buber's bar was pretty high, almost like striving for a global unity, a utopia, whereas Levinas's bar is seemingly low. Let's not kill each other, right? And respect, but actually that's quite difficult also. So here's my last question for you. One of the ways I've understood their difference is there political implications to the encounter with the other? And if Buber is a little bit more of a spiritualist in this sense, there's this agendaless presence, you said. In the I, thou, I do not exploit you or make you instrumental to some political cause, right? Whereas it seems like Levinas, there are immediate political implications, moral and political implications to the encounter. And so I wonder, on the realm of activism, politics, and social change, when you think of interreligious dialogue, do you think about that the way I'm talking, and a little bit oversimplifying, but the way I think of Buber as sort of a, for the encounter itself, or a little bit the way I'm describing Levinas, that has a broader political agenda to it?
Levinas came rather late to express his ideas on politics and on society. So his main question was, what is the relationship between the same and the other? So there's also, but he came to the stage in his later writings. So when he expresses this idea of thou shalt not kill, this is a thinking which is fitting after the Shoah. With Buber, we have a more utopian thinking. We have a more soft thinking, so to say. So we perhaps need both. If I compare Levinas with Rosenzweig, Rosenzweig would say the essence of revelation is thou shalt love. That's pre-Holocaust thinking.
Thou shalt learn.
First, thou shalt love. We are commanded to love.
Love.
Thou shalt love.
Right. Yeah.
So this is pre-Shoah thinking. Yeah. Buber, in a way, continues that thought that we have to be related to the other. There's its big contribution in I and Thou in 1923. For Levinas, the is Anliegen, is very aim of his theology, or philosophy better, is that we are commanded to respect the other, meaning before you are loving the other or going out to the other, there are limits. And the limit is that you are not allowed to hurt the other human being. This has, of course, political and social consequences. I think we need both. I think we need this rather idealistic thought. We have to go out to the others, but we have to know also that, first of all, before you are starting loving the others, just respect the others and see that what he wants is simply to have good life. So bring him life, do not transgress this commandment of thou shalt not murder. But we need both. We need the loving kindness of Buber, and we need also this limit of Levinas. I would say very shortly that if you have only love without the deen, without the judgment, then you are anarchic. But if you have only the deen, if you have only the judgment without love, you do not start being a human being, because then you are only a cruel human being. Between cruelty and, on the other hand, anarchy, there is the good Jewish recept of loving and having the deen. Deen v'rachamim, the father and the king, both belong together. And this is not only our theology, I think also our Jewish anthropology.
Beautiful. I'm so inspired by your work. Friends, make sure to check out Professor Ephraim Meir's books and articles. And we're so grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.